Welcome to All Power to the Developing, a podcast of the Eastside Institute, where social justice, human development, and community building come together. This is where you will meet activists, artists, teachers, scholars, helpers, and healers who are bringing creativity, hope, and possibility to individuals and communities all over the world. All Power to the Developing. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is your host, Desire Wandan, Des for short. And thank you for being here with us on All Power to the Developing. Today, our guest is a genre-defying performance artist known for fusing hip-hop with global traditions. From beatboxing to Mongolian throat singing, martial arts to sacred rituals. Whether he's reimagining a Japanese tea ceremony, or building intercultural bridges through the U.S. State Department's Next Level program, their work is deeply rooted in movement, myth-breaking, and creative transformation. They have performed everywhere from the Kennedy Center to underground clubs, and their artistic vision continues to stretch the boundaries of what performance can be. Welcoming to All Power to the Developing, Akim Funk Buddha. How's everything, Akim?
Hey, we good, man. Staying strong out here, maintaining the balance.
That's right, maintaining the balance. I'm so happy for you to be on our show. To me, you're such an amazing artist, and your work is so expansive and global, and the amount of people you touch and the amount of people you bring together from different cultures is such amazing work. So I'm really thankful for you to be on this podcast. So I want to kind of let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your earliest influences growing up and kind of what led you into hip hop? I know originally you're from Africa, right? What we would call the motherland. So what kind of led you initially into hip hop and then subsequently later on kind of starting this process of fusing hip hop with other cultures?
Oh, okay. So, well, I am from South Africa and Zimbabwe. My mom's from South Africa. My dad's from Zimbabwe. And they were actually in exile when Zimbabwe was Rhodesia. There was apartheid, and they got scholarships to study abroad. So I was actually born in Syracuse, New York. And I grew up there as a child, and we're talking now the 70s, right? So the early influences, of course, began before hip hop was born, just the music I was around. My older brother would put on Soul Train and, the funk and the soul. And as I grew older, I was about 8 years old, we moved to Africa. And I lived in Zambia, started one of the first crews in Zimbabwe, was dancing in the streets of Zimbabwe, Botswana. This is now in the 80s. And I was basically in the motherland when hip hop was sprouting. And so we would get tapes. It was like getting underground product, getting cassette tapes. And it was like almost like a black market, word of mouth to get the hip hop because it wasn't on the radio yet. And so I was actually one of the people sharing, this is what's out, this is what's out. And then eventually, of course, it made it to the radio stations. And then during this time, we made a trip back to the States. And I remember, hearing the Sugar Hill Gang, and I'm kind of melding a couple of years together because, life is not linear, even though it might happen in a linear fashion, the way the memories are stored. And so it was really like I didn't think of myself so much as a torch bearer or culture holder or a culture bearer or torch holder. But this was a setup for me to begin my origin stories, because by the time I came to New York City in the early 90s, arguably late 80s, early 90s, I was already seasoned with the history of hip hop because I had been following it, but I was able to immerse myself directly into it in New York in like 89, 90.
Mm.
Yeah.
You've described your art as myth breaking and bridge building. What does that mean in what seems to be a more increasingly divided world today?
That's a good question because when it's successful, it's very successful. But if it's not successful, it's not successful. And sometimes that may have more to do with the audience you're trying to reach or maybe the way that you present your craft. So obviously, bridge building, you're in one hemisphere and you connect with another hemisphere. So just by virtue of me growing up in Zimbabwe and then coming to New York, that was a bridge. And we actually put out a record called Zimbabwe Legit. And we co-produced a track that was actually the track that gave DJ Shadow his traction. And when I say me, I mean myself. I mean, when I say we, I mean myself and my brother Do Me Right. But he's part of me. So when I say me, I mean Do Me Right. When I say me, I say we. We're family, blood brothers. So that's the bridge, a very literal sense. Now, non literal or non physical, I should say, is what you're doing with the music. So, when I beatbox, I'm doing some Ndebele clicks or Zulu clicks. Ndebele comes from Zulu. A lot of people don't know that I'm actually doing that because beatboxing is so prolific and a lot of people do clicks and they're not necessarily speaking Zulu, which is fine. And then another bridge I'm connected with is the Tuvan throat singing, commonly referred to as Mongolian throat singing, which is overtones. You're making more than one sound. So I'm reaching and interacting with other cultures. So that's the bridge. Now, the myth breaking happens. This is really apparent if you're able to come see a show of mine, because I create one context and then I shatter that context and present another one. And where the shattering happens, in a good sense, shattering, that's where the myth is broken. So, for instance, I don't want to give away too much of my work because I'd love people to be surprised when they see the show. But a lot of the times people refer or think of Black culture or African cultures as a monolith, that they only exist in one context, that if it's like this, it can't be like that. So I have a scene whereby there's an individual meditating and there's a hip hopper that in this case can be me or an actor. And there's a verbal discourse that happens between them and the person who's meditating asks the hip hopper, "What do you know about emptiness?" And the hip hopper goes on about how his fridge is empty, his pockets is empty, and a very material response. And he asks some other questions as well that are kind of answered intentionally material. And then the person who's in the meditation pose says, "What should I know about hip hop?" And the hip hopper responds, "Are you sure you want to know? Are you really ready? You want to know?" And the hip hopper goes on and talks about how the space between the beats is what creates the melody and is just as important as the beats, which is the emptiness, the empty space. The hip hopper elaborates on being mindful when you freestyle rhyme. You've got to be in one place and two, three, four other places. And you can't be scattered and distracted, right? When you rhyme, you have to be coming from a place of center, at least for me. And from this place of center, I'm able to achieve a lot. So as I'm expressing this to you, I'm seeing like the kung fu flick. And I used to be intrigued about someone being calm when he has to get into a fight or battle, because I'd be like, shouldn't he be like ready to while out? And I learned this from my older brother. And he said, actually, in order to be a good fighter, you have to be calm because if you while out, you're actually out of control. And so, hence, this is some of the, you know, philosophical or perspective myths that I'm breaking, even on what meditation is, different ways to look at hip hop and how it's created. Something is made from different parts of pieces. Or you have one thing and it transforms into another thing. So hip hop is constantly breaking down one perception and creating another one, hence breaking a myth and then activating another one, you know? So that's what I mean by that.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I think that breaking myths through the arts, constantly showing not even an evolution, but different versions of the same thing, And when you
Yeah.
and when you speak about hip hop and even more so music or different styles of music, different people, there's a lot of different individual factors involved. So there's constant myth breaking. And then with building bridges, finding ways for so-called individuals to come together and bring all of those elements together, which is something I think I've always kind of admired about your work, that ability to bring everything together. One of the through lines of your work, though, is transformation of the body, the voice, even transformation of tradition itself. How does performance help us develop as people? Like, how do you feel performance helps us develop as people?
You know, that's a good question. I would use a metaphor like, how does good cooking make you feel? How does it transform you? When you're like really hungry and you want to eat something and then you eat, hopefully not too much. And both literally and metaphorically, there's transformations that is happening. Your body is nourished, you're energized, you can do more. And then also your spirit is mobilized. You've had some good grub. There's the health, the mental, the physical, all those things that happen. Similarly with performance, I tell this to my kids, the after school programs, because some of them are bashful and some of them don't want to perform it, which is fine because I tell them the what you perform, the art you're doing, it's like food. You need to do that for you, not for anybody else. Now, if you can make food in abundance and you want to share, that's up to you. And then I also share with them that guess what? This this art you're doing and you're creating, it comes in abundance and it's there for the sharing. And when you share it, you affect someone else because that someone else is like they can either relate to what what you're saying or they're inspired to create and then it's kind of like a snowball effect. So I'm sure we can all remember hearing a song and it making us feel good. I have these cassette tapes and when I listen to them, I can remember the day I recorded them. And I feel so good that I can't throw out the cassette tape. So every time I play my cassette tapes, I feel like I transform. So it's both literal and how you feel. And then I think it's also spiritual because it just elevates your soul. And if you're in a positive space, you're likely to do more positive things.
Yes, absolutely. And I think something you said there too also is about performance being for self. I think we're such in a time where if you have some type of talent or skill, the first notion is to exploit oneself.
Hmm.
Like, find a way to sell this, find a way to put myself on the internet and sell it. But what you just offered there is kind of using your art to heal yourself.
Yeah.
And also in the process, you will maybe influence others or reach others or use that to build bridges and break myths such as yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, I really like that aspect because that is something that I think is today a large part of performance and a large part of why the average person feels they can't be a part of it and they
Hmm.
are separate from it as the audience and the performer
Yeah.
because they feel they don't have the capacity to perform because they're not so-called professionals. But here you are
Yeah.
saying that art is for everyone and everyone has something to give. even if it's not on so-called the main stage or the so-called big stage.
Yes, and that the most important person to give to is yourself.
Mm.
And again, going back to the analogy of food, my early days, I used to roll posse deep with the community, and everybody was positive, and everybody was ready to share and want peace and love. And but the situation was such that we were all in different spaces of need and scarcity. And I remember having some food, and people were just like, "Oh yeah, we're all about sharing and kumbaya," and someone was like assuming they could just like take a piece of my food, and it's like, yeah, we're all sharing. But certain people had more resources than others, and I was just like, yo, who just finished my juice? Right now I was busking a lot back then, and I was
Yeah.
like, and then I was like, I don't know about all this sharing stuff right now. I need space for me. And
Yeah.
I had to retract from the group, from the community. And people were also like, okay, what's happening with Akim? He wants to do his own thing. So yeah, your work is first and foremost for you. Nourish yourself.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. We're going to take a short commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to speak about some of the amazing projects Akim has embarked on, from the urban tea ceremony to the bonsai lab and more. We will be back right after this quick message on All Power to the Developing.
Hi, I'm Melissa Meyer, Associate Director of the Eastside Institute. Welcome to All Power to the Developing. I hope you're enjoying today's conversation. In each episode, we introduce you to some amazing performance activists, play revolutionaries, and developmentalists from around the world who talk to us about their creative grassroots efforts to build a better world. If you like what you hear, please follow and share the series. You can find us on Amazon, Spotify, and Podbean. We'd love to hear your comments and ideas. Like everything at the Institute, the growth of All Power to the Developing depends upon the people who create it and benefit from it. We hope you're one of them. Thanks for your support, and now back to our conversation.
Welcome back to All Power to the Developing. We are here with our guest, Akim Funk Buddha. You have traveled the world countless times in many facets as just a performer, as a actual cultural ambassador. You've learned so much about people wherever you go, whether you're sharing your stories or you're building community, right? Like, what has that taught you about yourself, being able to go into all of these different realms and create all of this, intercultural stuff? What does that kind of tell you about yourself as a artist?
I guess being well traveled has taught me that my body feels different in different countries. Like, I think we understand that we're in different modes. We can enter different modes when we're under threat. You can be in fight, flight, or you could like freeze up. And I've always felt like, been working on myself for a while, this and that. And when I'm in the most peaceful place, I really feel my shoulders lower down. I feel so safe. Like, wow, I didn't know I felt unsafe. And once someone suddenly went running by me when I was in a very peaceful situation, and boom, I was in like a martial arts stance, like one hand fisted, the other hand open. I was ready to tango. And the people around me were surprised. And to tell you the truth, I was surprised too. And I was like, wow, yes, even though I have my origins from the motherland, I'm very much a New Yorker, right? And I was like, yo, why are you running? And this person was going to pick up something enthusiastically. And I was like, it was a nice, funny, laughing moment for everybody. And I was like, hey, I'm coming from New York. We ready for whatever. Don't just be running by me. So safety is something that people often don't talk about. So I thought I would want to say that. The other thing I learned about myself is it could be because I'm a freestyle MC and a freestyle dancer, but I've learned that I can weave myself into whatever music and dance is happening when I travel. So when other people travel to other countries, I've traveled sometimes with groups, with theater groups, with dance groups. A lot of people like to watch and like, oh, there they go. And they can usually tell by the way I'm nodding my head and that they're ready to pull me up. So I kind of learned something I already know, which is I'm ready to get down, like wherever, whenever, and however. So those are two things I wanted to share that I learned when I travel.
Amazing, amazing. Safety is always a must. Always a must. Yeah, self-preservation. With projects like the Bonsai Lab and the Japanese tea ceremony, you've created spaces for collaboration across disciplines and backgrounds. What is your approach to building creative communities? I know you've spoken tad bit throughout the podcast about some of it, but what is your approach to building creative communities? I know that could be a tough thing, right? When you're going into different cultures, different places, different spaces. But what is your approach to building those type of creative communities?
Yeah. Well, the Bonsai Lab was a space that I had for several years, maybe 17 years, and movers would come through of different genres and disciplines. And it was like a movement dojo. And people would move in a way that was non-competitive and they could really tune into themselves. And through this lab, community was built because, anybody listening to this who's gone out dancing, and then you see someone whom you saw when you were dancing, you kind of feel like you know them, right? So dancing is building by community, just by doing the act itself of dance. So I built community by having like these weekly sessions. And before the Bonsai Lab, I used to do intrinsic lotus movement sessions. I'd have people moving in silence, and that would tap them into their insights. Eventually, some music would kick in, but the whole objective was to dance to the rhythm inside of you. Through those sessions, I developed community. And then within my show, by virtue of the fact of who I am, I tend to have a diverse cast. I tend to, especially back in the day, And if you were to see my show is an example of community because people were different cultures all on the same stage. And I didn't do an audition and say, seeking people from different cultures. That was just how I wound up. So by being about it, I illustrated community.
Yeah, that's amazing work. And you had the space for 17 years, you said?
Yes.
Wow.
17 years. And it was just word of mouth and people would come through and just vibe and move. And certain people trained in there as well. And it is esoteric as it sounds. It was also a good way for people who would enter battles. I would have a method because you know what? The best battle is the one you battle yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
So in a way, when I'm talking about moving and being in tune with yourself, it's like, I don't know what people are visualizing, but in a way you kind of see yourself bird's eye view. And the more you can see yourself, the more you can illustrate yourself. It's kind of like martial arts. The greatest martial artists are actually the ones who are also healers, right? And if you know how to heal, you know how to unheal as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
To kind of build on top of that, many of your performance and the things that you've created are deeply physical, deeply spiritual, deeply improvisational. Do you have a creative or meditative practice that kind of grounds you in all of this?
That's a darn good question. Nowadays I feel like I've done so short answer is yes, I do. The long answer is when I was in my younger years, I used to delve into I still do now, but I need to start off by saying when I was in my younger years, I would do silent retreats and I would do like meditations and 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 it's like this subtle space of understanding that like if you're in tune with your breath, as esoteric as that sounds, like breathing. Imagine like a fight's going down and like or a boxing match, and all you do is know how to breathe. Like how is that going to help you fight? But if you know how to breathe, right, you can see your opponent breathing, and you could see how the breathing is moving, and then by his breathing, you could tell when he's going to strike, right? So you kind of become wise, right? And certain you start to learn certain shit that people people tend to move like this. Yo, every performer always starts from the center of the stage. Yo, why doesn't anybody break the barrier between audience and performer? Yo, I need to breathe before I perform. So I learned all these things. Now they're incorporated within my performance. So before I perform, I find space and I'm just breathing. I'm not thinking, oh, I gotta meditate, you know?
Mhm.
When I perform, I'm just like, yo, it feels sticky around here. So I intuitively break the fourth wall or the third wall or whatever dimensional wall you want to call it. So I'm doing a lot of things intuitive. So my performance is my practice.
Yeah. That's amazing work. It's just the performance is the practice, and the practice is almost like the performance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understanding that a performance is not a performance. You are just forming per situation. You know what I mean? You're forming. And then the greatest performance of all becomes the greatest performance. Like when you walk through the woods and you see some animals moving around in their natural habitat. It's beautiful. You see the birds moving. Maybe even see a snake like eating, and you see some real shit. That's some pretty crazy performance, if you say. But it's not a performance for you. You know what I mean? You just happen to be there. If you can perform like that, if you can really go into yourself and just move with who you are, doesn't mean it's got to be crazy or extremely over the top avant-garde, even though it could be. But it more means that it's just got to be coming from how you are feeling at that moment. And if you are authentically expressing and moving and becoming within that moment, you're not performing. Audience is witnessing something that is happening and they feel privileged to see it. You know what I mean? So it's like moving through the forest and seeing like a butterfly come out of a cocoon or a snake shed its skin or an animal moving, you know? You know what I'm saying? You become someone that creates an experience by virtue of you experiencing yourself first within that moment, within that time, within that breath, you know, so ever so present within that moment, it becomes the greatest performance of all.
Thank you so much for giving that. I really think our audience is going to get a lot of value from that part you just said. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wrapping up here, are there any new projects or collaborations on the horizon that you're excited about and you want to let us know about? And also, like, how do you continue to develop, in all of this in your own practice?
Woo! So let me mention what I got coming up, and I'll see how far I get with how I continue to develop. That might be another show. So what I got coming up is November 10. I'll be performing with Rennie Harris at the Joyce Theater, November 10th to the 16th. Put that on your calendar, and the show is called American Street Dancer. And I am being really who I am within this performance. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've started to do is I got a call to do casting for a movie called Once Again for the very first time. The director was Boaz Yakin. He's the director of the harder they come, and we are the Remember the Titans, Denzel Washington. And I did the core casting, not all of it. And so I reached out. My friends were perfect for the film. So I reached out to Future and Chihiro, Cute Beat, and Asha, and Dreams, and Abstract, and a couple of other dancers that I work with. And I was like, you know what? I can do this. So I started casting dancers who can act, right? So a casting agency is my latest project. If you're an actor and you know how to act, if you're a dancer and you know how to act, reach out to a brother. Or if you're an actor and you know how to dance, reach out to a brother. And so that's one thing. I call it Nexodus casting. You can find out about all of this on my website, funkbuddha.net, FUNKBUDDHA.net. Yeah, and you can see about all the different characters I work with. And it's not just hip hop. I'm working with a sister who's a tango dancer. Her name is Daria Meyer. Oh yeah, also shout out to Paris. He's a comedian and a dancer, and actor. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone's name, right? It's a lot of people I got involved in this film. And so keep a lookout for film that I want to eventually create with all this talent and whirlpool that I'm interacting with.
Yes, yes. And we're definitely going to put that on the calendar. That seems like an amazing project on the horizon, both the show and the casting. Maybe I'll throw in my headshots in there.
Yeah.
And
be ready to act though. And real quick, because you notice a lot of dance films is whack because the dancers can't act, right? Or the dancing is terrible because they're not really dancers. They're actors that did some training, and then they're like, yeah, okay, you do the part. Or then they call some real dancers to do some little stuff in the background. I want to end that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you're definitely the person to make that happen. And I definitely look forward to the work that you produce in the future, both with the show and the casting. My last question for you is, this podcast is called All Power to the Developing. When we created it, it was really to give a voice to all the people around the world that are helping others develop and that are developing. When you hear that title, All Power to the Developing, what comes to mind for you?
The youth. Yeah, the youth, and I guess passing the torch. And I think hip hop struggles with that because it's coming out of the scarcity or coming out of struggle, the battle. But we've created a form, right? And now we should pass this form on to the next generation. But a lot of the times, people are starting to give the OGs some flowers, but a lot of the times the OGs themselves are so competitive with each other that they just pull each other down, and then meanwhile Europe is running things, in terms of doing hip hop events, and they're not even reaching out to a lot of, I mean, some of them are, so I don't want a blanket statement, but I've been traveling and I go to hip hop events all over the world, and sometimes I just see, sometimes they try, but sometimes they're not even looking to pay homage. And right now in Europe, a couple of years ago, people started to say that beatboxing started in Europe, or beatboxers out there are just saying it has nothing to do with hip hop because they're doing their drum and bass stuff with it. And even though drum and bass came from hip hop, but they kind of going another direction with it. So they think it's theirs. Kind of the same thing that happened with rock and roll. So actually, so for the future, we've got to pass the torch to the youth. We got to let them know who was here before and who did it. The concept of paying homage and an ancestry is kind of something that happens loosely when people give shout outs. But in African traditions and in many traditions throughout the world, you pay respects to your ancestry. It's a paying of homage. It's different from, if sometimes people use the word prayer. It can get nuanced, but Christians get confused when they hear people pray to their ancestors because they say, oh, you should only pray to Jesus Christ. Well, besides the fact that Jesus Christ was a black dude who was an MC roaming the mountains, and so he's an ancestor. Besides all that, but that's another interview. We have got to, how I'm going to propel myself forward. Your question was how do I propel, is by moving backwards. And so I'm also teaching youth training programs, how to use their mind. And I work with 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and have them, doing tasks and obstacle courses in the forest. Really, that's how I'm moving forward. Of course, I'm making the music, and I've got many other shows. I'm doing aerial dance again, and developing aerial shows. I've got more coming up than can be announced. That's why I plugged my website. So I hope I answered your question somewhere in there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Akim Funk Buddha, for being on All Power to the Developing. It was such a pleasure to have you, and we might have you back in another episode. You're such an amazing, expansive artist. We'll definitely have you back in the future. This has been an episode of All Power to Developing. All Power to the Developing is available on all digital streaming platforms. Check us out, whether you're on Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, YouTube. Check out All Power to Developing. If you would like to let us know how much you like this podcast, you can write to us at podcast@eastsideinstitute.org. I repeat, that is podcast@eastsideinstitute.org. Write to us. Let us know how much the episode impacted you. We would love to read your response at the end of an episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We will link all the information to Akim Funk Buddha's website and future shows in the future. And if you would like to keep in contact with us, you could do the same. This has been a great episode of All Power to Developing. This is your host, Des. And thank you, Akim, once again for being on All Power to Developing. Peace.
Thank you. Respect. No.
All Power to the Developing was made possible in part by Growing Social Therapeutics, the Baylor Wolf Fund,